I'm Kath, by the way. I'm aware, I don't know a number of you in this room, and it is lovely to be with you. I wondered if you'd pray with me. I'm also conscious I'm on the live stream. Hello, live stream. I will try not to move around that as much. Sorry, cameraman. I wondered if you pray. This morning, when we were praying for the whole day at church, I had this sense that God was asking me that before I spoke today, that I would invite people into a moment of prayer and to use some words from the KXC hit, Do It Again, Lord, that we are familiar with singing with. There's these lines in that song that say, Lord, give us the grace of holy sorrow. We'll sow in tears for a harvest tomorrow. And I'm going to spend a bit of time this morning talking about what we sense God is wanting to do amongst children at KXC and beyond. And I'm very aware, speaking to the 3 p.m. crowd, that you may feel at times quite disconnected from the kids who are part of our church family, in that you probably don't see them very much when you come to this service. But the sense that we have quite strongly is that this is an invitation for the whole church to get on board. And one way of doing that is by saying, Lord, would you move my heart and would you break my heart for what breaks yours? So if you're up for it, for praying a bold prayer, because it is a bold prayer to pray, to ask for the gift of holy sorrow, but would you open your hands with me? And we're just going to ask the Lord to come and do that now. So, King Jesus, we honour you in this place. We honour you and we honour your ways and your purposes. And Lord, today we want our hearts to come into line with the purposes of heaven. And so we pray in this moment. We dare to pray that prayer. Lord, would you give us the grace of holy sorrow? We do not want hearts that are unaffected by the things that affect your heart, the things that move and grieve your heart. And so I pray, Holy Spirit, would you come? Would you fill each one of us afresh? Would you make us attentive to your voice? And not so, Lord, that we become, a crazy bunch of emotional people, but Lord, so that we would see a harvest, that we would see many young children, young people come into the life of your kingdom. Amen. Amen. About 10 minutes walk just south of here, there is a park called Corham Fields. Anyone know where I'm talking about? Anyone been to Corham Fields? A few in the room. So it's just south of Euston Road. And when I was in my early 20s, I have a memory of being a young whippersnapper. I just grabbed a coffee on Lamb's Conduit Street, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I thought, I'm going to find the nearest green space and go and enjoy my coffee in the sun. So I rocked up to the nearest park, which was Corham Fields, and I walked up to the gate, only to be greeted by this sign. I don't know if you can read it from where you are in the seats. It turns out at Corham Fields, you cannot enter the park unless you are accompanied by a child. So I was at the gates, and the security guard took one look at me, looked behind me to check that there were no children, in fact, with me. There weren't. I hung my head in shame and walked away feeling very disappointed and went in search of another park in London to enjoy my coffee in. Now, fast forward a few years, I got married. Me and my husband, Jamie, we left KXC, we left King's Cross and we moved out of London. And then I spent the best part of a decade in different places around the country, first in Bath and then in Liverpool. We led a church there. We did that for 6 years. And then really sadly, we had to bring that church to a close. And off the back of that, we were wrestling with what the Lord was calling us to next. And we began to have this strong sense that he was calling us back to London. Now, in this time, we'd had 2 kids. So Amelie, my eldest, is now just coming up to 6, and Noah, my youngest, is just coming up to 4. So we'd left with no kids. We felt this sense of calling to return to London with 2 kids. Now, I lost track of the conversations in that season with how many times I had a conversation with people that went something like, "Ooh, you're moving back into London with kids. Are you sure that's something that you want to do?" Because London kind of has this reputation that it's okay with kids for a certain amount of time, but then you quickly realise this is no place for a child, and the grass is greener, and you move out of London. So what were we doing? Thinking of moving back into London with our kids. Anyway, we felt the Lord call us. We moved back to King's Cross. We moved back to KXC. Best decision. So pleased to be here. But in the very first week back, I had this amazing experience where I rocked up again at Corham Fields, this time with my 2 kids in tow, and I walked up to the security guard, gave him the nod. He looked at my kids and was like, "You're okay," and let me through. And I entered into the promised land of Corham Fields. Now, it turns out that Corham Fields goes by that name because of a man called Thomas Corham. Here he is on the screen. What a guy. Now, he was a sea captain that had spent a bunch of time away from London at sea. Now, in case if you're worried, as I was, that he might be a naughty sea captain, he was not a naughty sea captain. He was a very good sea captain, so you can rest assured on this front, he was a good guy. But he returned to London after his travels, and he was horrified by what a hostile place London was for a child to be. And the thing that alarmed him the most was that in that time, children were being just abandoned on the streets of London, normally as a result of their parents being in complete poverty or struggling with some awful other situation that meant they had no other choice than just to give up their kids to the streets of London. And this had been happening, and they estimate around the time it was about 1,000 kids a year that this was happening to. And Thomas Corham saw this, and he was like, "This cannot stand. This cannot go on." And so, legend that he was, he petitioned the king at the time for 17 years on the trot and asked the king for permission to found this place called the Foundling Hospital. And when I say hospital, you need to think more broadly than like UCLH down the road. Hospital at that time meant something far broader. So it was about holistic care. Yes, absolutely about the healthcare of these children, but it was also about their education, their social needs, their needs for belonging. And that was what he established. And initially it was just off Hatton Garden, but then it found this more permanent home that is on the site that now belongs to Corham Fields today. And during its lifespan, it saw that this hospital cared for about 20,000 kids in and around King's Cross. And its legacy lives on today through Corham Fields itself and this kids' charity called Corham. Now, over the past few weeks, you may have heard, hopefully you have heard, that we have begun to share this sense that we have as a staff team, that God is doing something new amongst the children of KXC. And not just amongst the handful of those who are already part of the family here, but the strong sense that we have is that God is wanting to add to our number, and he is drawing children to himself in this season. And we've spoken a little bit already about what we are wanting to do as a team to reposition ourselves and restructure how we do things for KXC Kids on a Sunday in order to respond to this sense of invitation from God. I'll just name them really quickly here and before we dive into some other things. But the sense we have is that God is asking us to reposition ourselves to make space for 3 priorities. Firstly, encounter. We believe with every fibre of our beings that it is an encounter with the living God that will make the difference in a child's life. So we want to make space for every space that a child at KXC gathers, that encounter would be our top and number 1 priority. Secondly, mission. I've already said it. The strong sense we have is that the Lord is wanting to add to our number. He is drawing children and young people to himself. And in some ways, it feels a bit like one of those sort of Noah's Ark moments where you're being asked to build something before you've seen the rain come. But the strong sense that we have is that the rain is coming and we need to get ready. And we need to get ready to make room at the table for those children that he is calling to himself. And then finally, fun, which again, I've said this before, it sounds frivolous, but it feels really important and at the very heart of what God is wanting to do in this season. We believe that every child is unique, which means that they will connect with Jesus in all sorts of different ways. It's not one size fits all. And in the same breath, we have a community, and I see it in this room this afternoon. We have a community that is stuffed full of the most creative and gifted people. And it is time to match the best of the creativity that is represented amongst the adults and bring it to serve the children that they might encounter Jesus in ways that bring them to life, fully to life. And so we're wanting to lean into that too, whether that's through sport, music, art, whatever it is, we want to create space for it. Now, I want to say at this point, it's a bit of an undertaking, some of this. We are relaunching after Easter. You might have heard me say over the past few weeks that we think we need at least another 80 volunteers to make this dream a possibility, to see the things that we want to see in the next season. And personally, where I'm spending a bunch of my time on this moment, I have moments of thinking, have I just bitten off way more than I can chew? Like, is this really God? God, is this really something that you're wanting to do? Are you sure that this is something for us as a church? But every time I've had that sense of doubt come in, I've been met by an encouragement that this is not just Kath's pet personal project for KXC, that actually this is something that he is laying on hearts and minds all across our church family and calling others to join what he is doing, that we would see a move of God amongst our kids and amongst our young people. I want to give you a few examples just from the last few weeks that have really encouraged me. And this has all happened in about the last 10 days ago. So about 10 days ago, I was fresh from an argument with my own kids. And I was in Sainsbury's and I was moping, and I had the voice of the enemy in my ear being like, call yourself the family's pastor. You can't even get on with your own children. So I was slipping into this pit. And in that moment, I bumped into a lady from church, Nia. She attends one of the morning congregations. And she came over to me and she said, Kath, don't want to interrupt you in your day. But she laid a hand on my shoulder and just said, I meet with a group of intercessors who pray every week for KXC and what God is doing in this church. And I want you to know that everything that you are sensing, that God is on the move, that he wants to pour out his spirit upon children and young people, we sense it too. And we are praying for it too. And so in that moment, I was like, yes, come on, the intercessors are on board. This is great news. A couple of days later, I don't want to embarrass her because she's in the room, but Alice reached out and got in touch with me. And she said, Kath, I don't know whether this would be useful, but I have got experience in running songwriting workshops for children from age 5 to 15. Do you think this is something that could be useful in this new season at KXC? And to which I was like, yes, please, straight away. But the funny thing was, 3 days later, my own daughter on the way home from school, the first time she's ever done this in her life, turned to me and said, Mummy, when I was at school today, I wrote a worship song for Jesus. And I would show you, she then asked me to record it, and I would show you the recording, but it ends with my son launching into Let It Go, so I thought it was maybe a little bit irreverent, and I won't show you, I'll spare you that this morning. And then this morning, Kara Smith, one of the other mums at church, she came up to me after the 9:30 service, and she said, do you know, Kath, this morning, my daughter Eden came to me and said, Mummy, I've written a worship song for Jesus. And it was so beautiful. I'll butcher the words, but she said the words were something like, she said it with tears in her eyes, the words were something like, on your way, something like, no, on the way, Jesus, you're coming, you're on the way, something like that. To which I was like, where is Rich Decas? Let's get the guitar, let's write this up right here and now. Look out for the KXC Kids album coming soon. Anyway, so I was so deeply encouraged by that. A couple of nights ago, it was about 2 a.m. There was a house party in my street. I hadn't had a wink of sleep. And I just want to confess in front of you, it feels like a safe space, that I am not the best version of myself at 2 o'clock in the morning when there is a house party going on. So I was like, I have had enough. In my pajamas, I came down the stairs, put my slippers on, came out the front door, into the street, and just let rip at this group of young people that were in the street outside the house making a lot of noise. Like, what time do you call this? Don't you know that there's children trying to sleep up here? Just, by the way, my children were out for the count. Hadn't bothered them at all. It was me. But, in this moment, it pays to use them. So anyway, totally laid into these teenagers. Came back upstairs, lay my head on my pillow, and heard that voice again being like, call yourself the family's pastor. You're just shouting at teenagers in the street. So I, felt like a total slug. And woke up the next morning just feeling really overwhelmed about all this stuff. Opened my emails, had this email from a guy, Andre, in our congregation. He said this, Andre, if you're here, I haven't replied to your email. That's next on my list. So... But know that I was deeply encouraged. Anyway, he said this, hopefully Kath is reading this. If not, enjoy the read, but also forward it to Kath, please. I want to show you a scripture. 3 weeks ago, you spoke at the 11:30 service, and it moved me to near tears. Earlier that day, I'd asked ChatGPT what the Bible has to say about toys. A bit random, but follow me. And it led me to this verse. And the streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in its streets. It's lifted from Zechariah chapter 8, a picture of God's renewal of the city. Is this not peculiar, he goes on? This is one of the only scriptures in the Bible that explicitly speaks about play. This shows us that play is an integral part of God's vision for a restored nation. So when you got up on the pulpit and started to speak, my heart was screaming, yes, I am now realizing the excitement I feel is actually God's excitement for children shared with me. And this is the bit that really impacted me. He wants revival, and one of the signs of revival is kids playing in the street again. And I read that in that moment, and my response was, do you know what, Lord, this is so much bigger than me. This is not about anything that I'm doing. This is about you, and you are on the move. And whatever you are doing amongst children and young people in this part of London, my prayer is bring it on. I want to share one more encouragement to me, and that was Jess Bradley, our ops director. We were praying as a staff team about some of this a few weeks ago, and she suddenly pulled out the bag, a poem from, that I should clarify, she didn't write it, but a poem from her GCSE English that had just come to her. And she read this poem over us, and I was like, that is a picture of what I feel God is wanting to do in this season. So I just want to read it over us now. It says this: the skin cracks like a pod. There never is enough water. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts, silver crashes to the ground, and the flow has found a roar of tongues. From the huts, a congregation, every man, woman, child for streets around butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands, and naked children screaming in the liquid sun, their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light as the blessing sings over their small bones. When I'm brave enough to say it, and sometimes I don't say it because I'm scared that I'll be disappointed if I say it, but when I'm brave enough to say it, I truly believe that the Lord both wants to and is ready to pour out his Spirit like streams of living water among children and young people in this part of London. And the sense that I have had is it's almost like a tap has been turned on now. And we can't stop it, actually. A tap's been turned on, and we can't stop it. But the question for us is, will we be ready to receive what the Lord wants to do in the chapter ahead? And that is a question not just for me as a families pastor or for our kids team. That's a question for the whole church. Will we be ready to steward what he wants to do? And here's the thing. I began with that story about Corham Fields to say this. It's our strong conviction that God is wanting to do something new, and that God is doing something new, that it's happening, and we just need to be ready to receive it. But I guess there's two things that we could say off the back of that. First of all, if the picture of Corham Fields is anything to go by, if God is doing something new, and it's starting with our children and it's starting with our young people, could it be that your ticket into what he is doing that is new is only going to come if you have proximity to a child? It's only going to come if you invest in the life of children at KXC. But the other thing I want to say, and the reason I told that story, is to say this. This is not coming into a neutral space. This is coming about in the heart of a city that has a history of hostility towards children. Now, sometimes that's really overt and really obvious, like in some of the stories we've talked about, but at other times it's totally subtle, and it's easy. You blink and you'll miss it. But I also want to say this, and we often say this at KXC, there is wisdom in the saying, your destiny is hidden in your history. And just 10 minutes from here, part of our patch at KXC, there is a piece of land set apart where kids are not seen as an afterthought, they are not seen as an inconvenience or as second-class citizens, but they are seen as honoured guests. And I believe that the invitation to us as a whole church family is twofold. Firstly, that we would refuse to partner with any London narrative that treats a child as a second-class citizen. And secondly, that we would allow Jesus to renew our vision, that we would see children the way he sees them and begin to see them through his eyes and join with his purposes of blessing them. So with the time I've got left, I want to speak into that briefly, the way that Jesus sees children. And I'm aware I've done quite a bit so far of like, our sense is this, our conviction is this, our hunch is this, in case you think, do these people not preach the Bible? And we are getting to the Bible now, which is good news. And I want to talk about 3 ways that Jesus, I think, wants us to see kids. And I have confidence that these are not just original ideas that I've come up with, because these are based in the accounts of Jesus' interactions with kids throughout the Gospels. So why don't you turn there with me now? Are we ready for number one? Yes, come on. 1 or 2 people are ready. That's fantastic. That's all I need. That's good. Okay, so firstly, I want to say this. Jesus wants us to see our kids as the worship leaders of today, not just the worship leaders of tomorrow. So if you've got a Bible, we're not going to have time to read all these passages in full, but you might just want to track as we go. You can turn with me to Matthew chapter 21. We're actually going to be reading this passage together in full in 2 weeks' time because it's our Palm Sunday passage. This is the moment known as Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And it's this incredible scene when, in a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, Jesus arrives through the gates of Jerusalem in the manner of a king, albeit he's riding on a donkey rather than like a warrior's steed. But he arrives in the manner of a king, and the people, the crowds in response, start to pay him homage. They start to give him adoration and worship. They lay their cloaks out in front of him for him to walk along. They grab the nearest palm branches that they can find and wave them in worship. And these cries of adoration come out before him. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But we're told this interesting thing, that the whole city is stirred up by this event. You get this repeatedly throughout Matthew's gospel. In different places, Jesus turns up, and the crowds, it says, are disturbed. They're in turmoil because of what they've seen. And this is kind of a similar thing. The whole city is stirred by Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And then more so, as the very first thing he does when he enters the city, he heads into the temple courts. He drives out the moneylenders. He drives out the market traders. And in their place, he welcomes instead the blind and the lame from the gates surrounding the temple. He welcomes them in, and he begins to heal them. And we're told that there are 2 groups of people witnessing this and standing by. Firstly, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, who we're told are furious. And secondly, and we often miss this when we read this passage, there's a group of kids present. And what they are doing in response is shouting out at the top of their lungs, Hosanna to the Son of David. Let me just read a few of the verses. This is verse 15. But when the chief priests and teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, replied Jesus. Have you never read? From the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise. Who are the worship leaders in the story? It's not the priests. It's not the leaders. It's the kids who are present, shouting out praise. And in case we're tempted to think, yeah, but they've just heard that in the crowd. They're probably just mimicking what they've heard the crowd doing out in the city. Jesus says that's not what's going on. Jesus says this is exactly as it's supposed to be. And he quotes Psalm 8. From the mouths of children and infants, you have ordained praise on account of your adversaries to silence the enemy and avenger. It has been ordained by God that a child's worship will be the thing to silence the voice of the enemy and the avenger. And so we need to see rightly, as Jesus himself did, that the kids are the worship leaders of today, not just the worship leaders of tomorrow once they've grown up and they've got a guitar. And I want to say this is happening already in our church family. I think we're seeing almost like the first fruits of this amongst our kids that are already part of the congregation here. And I say that not just as a family's pastor, but as a mum of 2 young kids. When I see them worship as they do as part of the 9:30 service, I am seeing more happening in that space for their discipleship than almost anything else that they are doing in their lives right now. And just like in the gospel accounts, some of that might begin with them mimicking and saying back what they've heard the adults say. But if Jesus is to be believed, and I think we should agree that Jesus is to be believed, that's why you're here, there is a point at which he says, actually, this isn't just parroting. This is praise being called forth from the depths of who they are. Now, I'll let you into a secret. Word on the street is that I believe is the breakout hit amongst the toddlers of KXC. Tim's own daughter, I've been told, is going around her house constantly at the moment just going, I believe, I believe, I believe, which is absolutely amazing. And the song is driving a lot of us as parents absolutely mad as we have to have it on repeat. But I also want to show you a little clip of two of our other kids, Nala and Gigi. This is just them warming up on their way into KXC last week. Here they are. There they are. It's totally precious. And the R is right. It is R. It's so gorgeous. But it is more than that, too. It's actually a pure confession of faith. And it's not come about from a rational exercise of like, have I fully understood the gospel? Can I recite to you the Nicene Creed? Like, none of that is going on. This is about deep calling to deep. It is, as St. Anselm and St. Augustine said before him, this is faith seeking understanding. In other words, it is faith that leads to a longing for a deeper understanding then of that faith. This is what God is doing amongst our kids. And what I sense is that it is not an accident that the song that they have decided to fixate on is I Believe. It is the purest confession of faith. And not only that, the sense that I've had that the Lord is saying around this is that the reason it is that song is because he is wanting to raise up amongst our kids a generation of people who are not ashamed of the gospel. And it is starting now. It's starting in their infancy. That little one in the car seat, she's not even old enough for a front-facing car seat, and she's singing it. It's absolutely beautiful. And I want to say to us in this room, we would do well to learn from them. We would do so well to learn from them. Firstly, to make space for them. Make space for them to be worship leaders in our community. And secondly, to look at the way that they lead with faith-seeking understanding, not needing to have all their ducks in the row to make a wholehearted, unashamed confession of faith. And my prayer is that it's a confession of faith that leads many of their friends to make their own confessions of faith too. So that's the first thing that I think Jesus wants us to see about kids. The second is this: see that kids carry the favour of heaven. Turn back a couple of chapters with me to Matthew chapter 18. Verse 1 says this: at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, there is a parallel account to this in Mark's gospel, which is even more awkward. And I kind of wanted to read that one, but we're in Matthew, so we'll stick with Matthew. But it's more awkward because actually it comes about because Jesus has overheard the disciples having an argument amongst themselves about who is the greatest. That is how this scenario has come about. Matthew spares them the embarrassment and just says that they've asked the question, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus' way of dealing with this is amazing. It's extraordinary. He doesn't answer the question direct straight away. Instead, he calls a little kid to come and join them. He places the kid in front of the disciples, so all eyes are on this child. And then he says, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And then a few verses later in verse 10, he says this. It's a verse I've never noticed before. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. It's a bit cryptic. We're going to kind of come back to that in a moment. Essentially, this is a beautiful teaching moment in the life of Jesus, as only he can do, where once again, the upside-down nature of his kingdom rule and purposes disrupt the normal power dynamics of the day. Now, in Jesus' day, a child had even less social standing than they did in Thomas Corum's 18th century London or our version of London today, but it is them who will become, and those who will become like them, refusing worldly status, laying aside worldly accolades. It is them, that Jesus said, who are the greatest in the economy of heaven. And not only that, but Jesus goes on to say this, apologies for the live stream, when you lower yourself, are you with me? When you lower yourself, when you crouch down, when you look a child in the eye, when you extend to them the welcome of heaven, you're actually welcoming Jesus himself. That's what you're doing in that moment. Why? I want to suggest this, because in Jesus, God crouches low. He came to seek and save what was lost, and most especially the lowest of the low in society. And low down, therefore, is always where Jesus is to be found. There is a bias in the heart of God towards the poor, towards the lowly, towards those with no social status, towards, as Jesus puts it in these passage, these little ones. And it's in his nature. I love this about Jesus. It's in his nature to stoop low, to lift them up and bestow favour upon them. And it's these little ones, he says, whose angels get unlimited face time with the Father. Now, stay with me on this bit, because this is a bit of a complicated idea. But I thought this was brilliant. Essentially, this draws on the Jewish worldview of the angelic, which saw angels as heavenly representatives of whole nations, sometimes of particular churches, and sometimes of individuals. You see this particularly worked out in the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, but elsewhere in Scripture we see this too. But here, it's these angels representing the little ones who Jesus says has got like first-class access to the Father. Now, I want to say at this point, I was reading some commentaries around this, and scholars are like at pains to say that little ones here probably doesn't just mean children. It probably is a broader category of the lowly, others who don't have a social standing. And I think that's right, and that definitely tracks with the sense of the rest of the passage. But if I was sitting down for a cup of tea with one of these stuffy scholars, what I would want to say with them, with all due respect, is, yes, it isn't just about children. That's right. But can we just agree, it is also very much about children. Jesus has literally just had a child in front of him as a visual aid before he's launched into this speech. And sometimes I wonder, as adults, we are so adult-centric, the way we read these things. When we read a passage like this, the thing we immediately jump to is like, yeah, what does this mean for me? And how I need to become like a child in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's right, that's good. That tracks with the sense of the text. Absolutely, that's what Jesus is doing. But we also miss the obvious implication, which is that kids carry the favour of heaven. And if it's not clear enough here, you only have to skip one chapter ahead in Matthew to find Jesus in the middle of another teaching moment. He's in the middle of this teaching moment about marriage. It's like this fairly heavy moment. And there's some people who in that moment think this is a good time to bring their kids forward to Jesus and to ask him to lay hands on them and bless them. And the disciples, understandably, are like, this isn't actually a great time. Could, come back later. And Jesus says, no, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Children are not second-class citizens in the kingdom of heaven. If anything, they have got first-class seats, and we as adults are being booted into economy. That is how it works in the economy of heaven. And I want to say this, and I say this to you as 3PMers as well, who are every much as part of this church family with our children as the 9:30 and 11:30 morning congregations. It is time for us as a church, KXC, to align ourselves with the purposes of heaven in this way, and treat the children that the Father has already brought to us and is bringing towards us as first-class citizens in this community, and recognise that the favour of heaven rests upon them. And I leave you with this on this. If you are hungry at the moment to be more like Jesus, if you are hungry to know greater intimacy with him, if you are contending and praying for a move of God, could it be that the invitation today for you is not just to respond in ministry at the end of this talk, although I hope you do, but maybe the invitation is to crouch low, to get alongside some children, to look them in the eye, to extend to them the welcome of heaven, because in doing so you will meet Jesus. That is where he said he is to be found. And finally this, I think Jesus wants us to see that kids carry vulnerability. Verse 6 says this, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it will be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Here is a verse we do not preach on very often for understandable reasons. It's one of those feisty Jesus moments that I love. But we would do well not to just brush over it as awkward, but to actually heed the warning in his words. It is deeply offensive to the heart of God when a little one is caused to stumble. It angers the heart of God. And Jesus illustrates this by saying basically drowning would be preferable to what is coming to you if you cause a little one to stumble. And at the risk of coming across as a super intense person, although I have resigned myself that ship has long sailed, but a number of us who have been praying for a move of God amongst our kids, we found that when we're praying, at times it's like we're angry in prayer. We get in touch with this anger, this like roar within us. And we're angry at the enemy's schemes to wreak havoc in the lives of children and young people in this nation. And we should be angry. We should be angry. But we remember when we are that the Apostle Paul said that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the rulers, against the authorities, the powers of this dark world, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I close with this. Here in King's Cross, we are praying for this part of London to be delivered from darkness into all the purposes of heaven. And we believe that this is a word, not just a word, but a promise that God has spoken over King's Cross, that this land is being delivered. And our job, and the question for us is, will we get on board with his agenda and what he is doing? Will we align our wills and our hearts with his in prayer and be a bit like midwives ushering in that deliverance that he has promised to bring? I end with this. As a staff team, we were praying about this a few weeks ago, and I had this picture in my mind's eye taken from the Pixar film, The Prince of Egypt, which is basically like the Disneyfication of the Exodus story. If you haven't seen it, it's actually cracking. You should see it. A bit dated now, but you should see it. Anyway, I had this image in my mind lifted from that film, and it's the moment that depicts the part of the Exodus narrative when Pharaoh has finally agreed to release the Israelites from slavery. And in this moment, you suddenly see thousands of Israelites gathering, lining up to leave the city. And all around them, there are these like enormous monuments to the empire that have just been smashed and are lying in pieces along the floor. And these people are walking out into their liberation from slavery. But right at the front, leading the charge, are a group of kids. And it's from the kids in this moment, in this film, that this beautiful song of praise to Jesus begins to erupt. It's actually really funny. I didn't say this morning, but it does actually crack me up. Because in the Disney film, this song is, you probably remember it, "There can be miracles when you believe." And this is like terrible. I actually sounded quite good there. I need this mic more often. Anyway, practice in the shower. Anyway, but it's this like slight Disneyfication of the whole thing, which is like, if we just believe for a miracle, then we look deep enough with him, there'll be one. And that's what the parents are singing in this moment. The kids start singing this song in Hebrew. And it's all based on the Miriam's song from the scriptures, which is like, "I will lift a song of praise to the Lord, for he has delivered me." That's what's on the lips of the kids in that moment. Anyway, I digress from my Mariah Carey moment. But I had this picture of this image, but in my mind's eye, I saw King's Cross, not Egypt. And I saw thousands of people being led out and liberated from slavery. And at the front of the charge were children as the worship leaders. And so just as Tim said earlier, we are going to enter in the coming weeks into a season of fasting and of praying that King's Cross would be delivered, and with it, every child and young person that calls this part of London home. We are praying for a move of God, that the Spirit would be poured out like streams of living water on our children in such a way that we see them come fully alive in the presence of Jesus in a way that changes and marks them forever. I close with these words from the Apostle Paul. He said this, those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. That's you and me too. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father.